Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my March wrap up. So the month of March actually went really well for me. Throughout the beginning, I was flying through books like nobody's business. However, that did start to taper off a little bit towards the end. And honestly, the only reason I'm really mad about that is because if I'd have finished the book that I'm currently reading, March would have been my best reading month ever, which would have been great. But I did still have a really great reading month overall, so I'm not going to complain about that too much. So hopping straight into the stats, in March I read a total of 4,205 pages, which broke down to an average of 136 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 1 2-star, 2 3-stars, 4 4-stars, and 2 5-stars, breaking down to an average of 3.7 stars per book, which is slightly more than average for me. For the demographics, I read 1 young adult book and 8 adults. For the formats, I read 7 standardly formatted books, 1 arc, and listened to 1 audiobook. For the genres, we had 4 fantasy, 3 romance, 1 mystery, and 1 sci-fi. And lastly, for the places where I sourced these books from, 8 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2022, and 1 of them was sent to me by the publisher. So the first and the last books that I read in March were part of the same series, so I'll cover them together, and that is City of Dragons and Blood of Dragons by Robin Hobb. So if you guys are unfamiliar with the Rainwild Chronicles, it is the 4th series in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings overall, and in this one we are following a group of dragons who were left to grow up in a community of humans, and the humans were tasked with looking after them. However, as the dragons have started to get older, they've started to become discontented with their life. They're also growing a little bit more boisterous and restless, and so the humans decide that they are going to move them on, and they put together a group of the misfits of their society, so people who won't be missed and who don't have family, to escort these dragons somewhere else. These are definitely not my favorite Robin Hobb books, and this is definitely not my favorite series in the Realm of the Elderlings. It did suffer from some publishing issues, and I think you can tell. This one I gave it 4 stars, but in hindsight I feel like it should have been a 3, and this one should not have been a book on its own. These two definitely should have been published together, because pretty much nothing happens in City of Dragons. It is mainly revisiting all of the main characters, reintroducing a couple of perspectives that we've seen in earlier series in the Realm of the Elderlings, and establishing where these people are and moving them around so that they are in place for the series finale, which was Blood of Dragons. Blood of Dragons I gave 4 stars to. The first 250 pages were very slow, and I was struggling to want to pick it up. However, I did really like the conclusion. I teared up at a couple of points regarding some characters that I guess are special to me and have been throughout the Realm of the Elderlings. My only real issue with the very end of this is that whenever we got to a conflict or a point of action, it seemed like we would cover the beginning and the setup of it, and just as we were really getting into what was happening, it would cut away and go somewhere else, and we would regroup with those characters after the action. So it was very much like all of the action was happening off page. I don't find the characters as likable in this series, and I just feel like it is a lot weaker than what we've read from the Realm of the Elderlings so far. That being said, there is still some great character development in here. Once again, Robin Hobb delivers characters that you really despise. I've never hated characters like I have some of Robin Hobb's, and the ones that you're supposed to hate, not like the ones that you're supposed to root for. And we once again had some great character development throughout here. Robin Hobb has a very slow-paced writing style, and I feel like that lends a lot of realism to her books, because everything kind of moves at a more realistic pace, which can be a little tedious to read in parts, but I feel like in the majority of her series the payoff is worth it, because over these slow moments you've really grown closer to the characters. But yeah, this one just it wasn't the strongest, and I'm glad that we're moving on to the final Fits trilogy now. A little bit sad because it is the final series that's been published in the Realm of the Elderlings so far, but I've heard really good things about the Fits in the full series, so I'm excited to get into it. We do have content warnings in this series. There is a lot of ableism, although with every book in the series I would say it's less present. We also have a whole ton of like torture, gore, sad animal stuff, sad child stuff, and sexual assault in these 2 books specifically as well. And And these two were also gifts from Catherine and Tracy, so thank you very much to Catherine and Tracy for gifting these to me. Next up, I carried on with the Dragon Train and I read Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons, and the book that I failed to finish that I really wanted to get into this wrap up is The Name of All Things by Jen Lyons. These are book 1 and 2 in the Chorus of Dragons series, and I am 174 pages into book 2, so I didn't really come close to having this done before the end of the month, did I? The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons is about a young man called Kieran who's grown up hearing storybook tales of like legends and heroes, and as he grows older and becomes embroiled in like the happenings of this book, he realizes that everything he thinks he knows is not quite the reality, and on top of that he learns that it's very possible that he is the topic of prophecy himself. However, he's actually maybe destined to destroy the world instead of saving it. So this should not be a book slash series that I enjoy, but I really liked this first book. Definitely. We've yet to see how I feel about this one because I'm not as into it so far, I think, as I was into this one. But this one I gave 4 stars to. This is a very confusing book. I don't even really know what the overarching plot is, so I wouldn't really know how to explain it to you guys. We also have a ton of these characters of legend in here. There are multiple different types of legendary character, and there are 8 of each of them. So we have like 8 gods, 8 god kings, 8 dragons, all of which are relevant to the story, but I could not explain how, because on top of all that we have reincarnation in here. There is a death god and her followers who can resurrect people who are dead, so there's people who should be dead and aren't, people who are thought to have been killed and escaped, there's people who switch bodies with other people, because we also have ancient artifacts in here that have like magical abilities. So it was very confusing, and if you know me, I like things that are concrete. I like as a reader to be able to puzzle out what's going on and tie everything back and everything be really neatly linked to everything else, and this book is definitely not that. But when I was reading this, I just kind of had the sense that Jen Lyons knows what's going on and that I just need to roll with it. There is also a levity in the text. It's kind of told in not necessarily a conversational style, but it definitely feels like somebody telling a tale or something else, which is what the bulk of this is. But it has a very, I don't want to say campy, I want to say like a Princess Bride feel to it, like that vintage fantasy story that has a little bit of like levity to it, if that makes any sense to you guys at all. And the type of fantasy that I usually love is a little bit more doom and gloom, with our hero spending most of the book just sat in the corner brooding. But the one thing that made me really enjoy this book is the way that it's told. So we start off right at the beginning of here with a foreword from a guy who has said that he's put together a transcript that leads up to the burning of the Capitol. We then move in to the first section of this book, which is predominantly a conversation between 2 people, and that's where we meet our main character Kieran, who is currently imprisoned with a monster called Talon. Talon asks Kieran to tell her a story, and he reluctantly agrees and asks what she wants to hear, and she asks to hear his story. He begins telling his story in first person. When we get to chapter 2, Talon interrupts him and says like, no, that's not actually how the story goes, you're not starting in the right place. So then she starts telling his story in third person from an earlier point of time, and the perspectives continue like that, alternating between the 2 of them in first and third person, up until Talon's story reaches the point where Kieran's story starts, and Kieran's story reaches very near the present day, and then they kind of converge. And I just find this to be really compelling and really captivating, even though for the majority of the time that I was reading it, I didn't really have much of a clue what was going on, which is usually integral to my enjoyment. Definitely really enjoyed this one. I think it's a fun time. I think I'm attracted to the intricacy of it because I know the intricacy is there. I just can't puzzle it out yet. But what I'm hoping for that I'm not currently getting in The Name of All Things is for things to become a little bit more concrete and apparent to me. What I really wanted from book 2 was for it to continue the story and also cement what we learned in here so that everything was becoming a little bit more clear. But what is actually happening in The Name of All Things, which I will of course get into in my April wrap up, is we are now following the same format as this with 2 people telling a story, but it's a different character's story that kind of overlaps with Kieran's in a different place in the world. And I'm not sure how I feel about us doing the exact same thing again with a different character essentially. So currently not loving this as much as I love this one, but I still have a whole ton of it to go, so we'll see how it turns out. I then read yet another adult dragon fantasy, which was Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. I listened to the audiobook of this one, and oh my god, this guy's voice is like butter. I'm not a huge audiobook person because I'm very particular about narrators, but would definitely recommend giving this one a listen because honestly just the narrator's voice it's wonderful, it's magical. Now the synopsis of this book that I've heard the most frequently I find to be not necessarily misleading but not necessarily accurate either. The thing that I most commonly hear is that in this world 1 in like every 1,000 women has the ability to call down dragons, and 1 in every 100 men has the ability to harness the strength of the dragon, like the size and the force of a dragon, which isn't really how the magic in here works. So we have 2 castes in here. We have a noble caste and a lower caste, and all of the women in this world are tested to see if they have magical abilities, and if so, no matter who they are raised to like a much higher rank and they are sent to learn how to wield their abilities. 1 in every 1,000 women does have the ability to call down dragons in here, but that is not all that the women of this world can do. The magic is only available to women, and while the best thing that you can do is have the ability to call down a dragon, there are also lower tiers of the magic that allow you to do other things, one of which is to channel the strength of a dragon into a man. So it's not something that the men do, it's something that the women do to them. They also have abilities to travel to a demon dimension, they can take control of a dragon, they can summon dragons, and a whole range of different things. So we have the noble caste, which has all of these magical people in it. We also have the men in the military who are raised to a higher rank, and then we also have this bottom caste where the men are forcefully drafted into the military, but they are essentially not trained very well and they're just put on the front lines and used as pretty much fodder. Every man, including our main character Tao, is expected to serve in the military in this world, and it's something that he's kind of accepted, but as he is reconnecting, I guess, with his childhood crush, he decides that this kind of life isn't for him. However, if he refuses, he will essentially be used for grunt work. Like, people who decide not to join the military are used for menial labor, and he doesn't want that because that will put him right at the bottom of society. So he hatches this plan to kind of get out of military service without joining this bottom class, up until something terrible happens to the people of his community and also his family, and Tao then very quickly changes his mind and sets himself on like this single-minded path of revenge, where he is going to join the military to rise his rank so that he can be on equal footing to the people who have hurt him and gain his revenge. Now there is a military plot line in here as well, because the reason why it's so important that all of the men are drafted to the military, because there is an ongoing war that has lasted, I think it's over centuries at this point, between the people of where Tao is from, which if I remember correctly is an island, and pretty much the rest of the world, who are referred to as heathens. So I did really enjoy this one. I gave it 4 stars. It does throw you in at the deep end a little bit with the like terminology surrounding the magic and things like that. Throughout the first couple of 100 pages, things can be referred to in a very offhand manner, but it does go into it a little bit more when they become a little bit more relevant to the events of the book later on. But there is a glossary at the back to refer to, which did help me out a lot. I did really like the writing, and the audiobook narration, like I said, is gold in this. Also really liked the magic and the world, and I'm really interested in the conflict between the place where Tao is from and pretty much, like I said, everybody else in the world, which does play a part in this, and a big part. But my one kind of is not a criticism because it's very intentional, but like I said, Tao's focus in this is so single-minded that he has blinders on because of how hell-bent he is on getting his revenge. There are a lot of things about the world and the war that he is either not aware of or not as interested in because of his sole focus on his revenge. And as a character, he is reduced to how solely determined he is to pursue his revenge mission, to the point where he barely has any other personality because all of his time is spent working towards his goal. All of his focus is in how he can achieve his goal, and he doesn't really have time to develop anything else. He pushes a lot of people around him away. There is a romance in this book, which, while I do see why it's in here and why it is necessary in terms of the plot and character development, I wasn't interested in it, so it was a little bit tedious to read through those parts. And I will say that the kind of like like shining star, like my favorite thing about this book as a very character driven reader was Udwak, who is just precious and I love him so much. He's the kind of like strong silent type that you know has your back, even though he's not especially forthcoming with words or like seems like somebody who cares very much about anything. So I will be continuing on with this series very soon, maybe when I finish The Name of All Things. I'm really excited to see how the sequel develops, because there was a whole ton of stuff that I think is actually going to form the bulk of the plot of this series that was developed in the end of this first book. My reading then veered off in a very different direction and I read a whole ton of romance. The first two being the Bellinger Sisters series by Tessa Bailey. So the first book is It Happened One Summer and the sequel is Hook, Line and Sinker, that was sent to me by Harper 360 for review. So thank you very much to Harper 360 for that. So both of these books follow one of the Bellinger sisters who end up in this very remote seaside town in Washington state where their father was actually from. Now this is a little bit of a shock to their system because they actually have a very rich stepfather and they live in LA. Piper, the oldest sister, is pretty much an influencer. She's a party girl, and the reason why they get sent to this town is because she breaks into a hotel and throws a wild party, and her stepfather is kind of sick of her antics and sends her to this town to kind of become more grounded and have a little bit of a reality check. When she's there, she meets this like gruff burly fisherman called Brendan, and this is a grumpy sunshine relationship. So I've heard amazing things about this one and I actually didn't love it. There were elements of it that I was into, but a lot of this I found really cringy, and the smut, it was like 50-50. Some of it I liked, some of it just really was not doing anything for me. I don't think I love grumpy sunshine romances because similarly to with these two, spoiler alert, I really love this one. The Brown Sisters series by Talia Hibbert, I adored the first two books, and the Grumpy Sunshine book, which is actually A.G. Brown, really just didn't do it for me, and I gave that one 3 stars like I gave this one 3 stars. If you've seen Parks and Recreation, Brendan in this just reminded me of a young hot Ron Swanson in the way that he was like very kind of stuck in a routine, very loyal, very honorable, but ultimately he just read older than our main character Piper, who didn't really read like a real person to me. So while I didn't mind some of the plot line in here that was outside of the romance, and while I didn't really mind Brendan as a character or Piper as a character because she did grow on me, there's a lot of character development through here, I just didn't really vibe with the two of them together. The smut scenes, as I said, like a lot of them made me cringe, and some of the declarations of love that happened throughout here just seemed like a little bit much. My honest to God reaction was like, why are these two so pathetic? Like, I love a big dramatic declaration of love, but in this one it just was not doing it for me. So after reading and not really liking this, which I've heard so many amazing things about, I was a little bit nervous about picking up Hook, Line and Sinker. This one follows Piper's younger sister Hannah, who works for a movie production company, and one day when she's working on a movie, the director decides that he doesn't really like the setting of LA for the movie. He thinks it's not the mood that he's going for. So Hannah suggests that they film the movie in Westport, which is the seaside town in Washington state. So Hannah is present in It Happened One Summer. Throughout that first book, we see a kind of friendship develop between her and Fox, who works on the same ship as Brendan. However, he has the reputation of being like a massive ladies man, and he's actually really interested in Hannah, but she's very firmly established that she's not looking for that because she has a crush on the director of this movie and she would very much just like to be friends. So he doesn't want to jeopardize their friendship and decides to go along with it, even though he is more romantically interested in her. I love friends to lovers when it's done well. I think it's a difficult trope to do well because you have to establish a friendship between characters, which when you're talking about like a 350-page book, it's a lot to be able to establish that friendship and make a reader believe it and then turn it romantic. But I fell in love with this one. I knew going into this, because Hannah's like really into music, she like collects vinyl, I knew that she would be more of a protagonist that I could get behind than Piper, but I actually foolishly thought that Brendan was more my type than Fox, and absolutely not. I love a pretty boy charmer, and I have for a very long time. Kind of hoped I'd grown out of it, but apparently that is not the case. So this one starts with a prologue of text messages that Fox and Hannah have been sending to each other in the gap between It Happened One Summer and Hook, Line and Sinker, and from the moment I read those text messages, I knew that I was going to love this book. Now I will say that as I was reading this, I had COVID, so I don't remember a whole ton of the specifics about this, but I did give it 5 stars. I did love it. I like that this book, and also another book that I'm going to talk about in just a second, showed men being insecure, I guess, because with all books, with society in general, we are often led to see men as like big, strong, unemotional beasts, I guess. Whereas this one highlighted some particular insecurities on behalf of Fox that I really appreciated, and honestly, he's just a sweet cinnamon roll that I love so much. The smut in here was fire. I honestly thought when I read this one, I was like, maybe just Tessa Bailey's writing isn't for me. Absolutely not, because I adored this one. And it's interesting because I feel like most people commonly love this one and don't love this one, but this one is definitely my favorite and I had a great time with it. And this one was a gift from Lamia, so thank you very much, Lamia, for gifting this one to me. I then went on to read what is undoubtedly my favorite book of the month. Dare I say, my favorite book of the year right now, which is wild, and that is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. Also read this when I had COVID, and I was actually really struggling to get into it because it has not necessarily a difficult writing style, but it has a very particular tone to it that I feel like you need to adjust to. But this one is an office enemies to lovers romance about Lucy and Josh, who work for a publishing company. The publishing company used to be 2 separate firms, however neither of them was doing well financially, so instead of both of them going bust, they decided to merge. However, both of the companies have very different values. The company that Lucy worked for really values literature as an art form, whereas the company that Josh worked for treats books as like units to sell. So essentially they're interested in investing in what is going to make them a whole ton of money. Now Josh and Lucy are both assistants to the CEOs of this merged publishing house, and they despise each other. Like, they spend all of their days playing games that irritates the hell out of each other. So there's a game that they play where Josh will like very subtly mirror everything that Lucy does. They also have a game where they just like stare at each other for as long as possible until one of them reacts. All of this hatred comes to a head when the CEOs announce that there is a new position opening up in the company, which Josh and Lucy would both be perfect contenders for. However, it would promote one of them above the other, so they both agree that if the other gets the job, then they will quit because they could not stand to work for each other. I adored this. Like, I was obsessed with this for a solid week. This is the reason why my reading slowed down so much in the second half of the month. The sexual tension in here was amazing. Joshua Templeman, not even kidding, lives in my mind rent free. I created art inspired by this because I had to work it out of my system. I'm currently working on Hating Game Candles. As soon as I read it, I wanted to start a reread. As soon as I put this book down, I put the movie on. I watched the movie again a day later. I went through and I reread certain scenes of the book. I opened my laptop to start work one day and the movie was still open from when I'd watched it, so I just rewatched my favorite scenes. Literally obsessed. This is my favorite romance ever, and I feel like this is either going to be a book that I return to frequently because it's comforting and I need to reread it and reabsorb this story, or it's going to be a book that I never ever read again because I know that I'll never have exactly the same feelings as I did the first time I read this one. Now, as I said, I did watch the movie. I don't think that the movie is necessarily a great representation of the book or the story, and I do think that there's elements of the movie that they could have very simply changed to add more cohesion to it and link up more to the book and other points in the movie that they just missed. Like, there's one thing in the movie that they just needed to change the color of and it would have been a perfect like 3-way tie-in, and they didn't bother. I also don't know what it is about romantic movies these days, but they seem to be like a collection of the highlights of a story strung together as opposed to like an actual narrative that you can enjoy in film format. Like, they seem a little bit jumpy, and while this is a rom-com, so it's just designed to give you like those buzzy good vibes, I will say that there was a lot of complexity within how the romance kind of worked out in this book that I feel was pretty much erased from the movie, and it was like just a little bit more surface level. That being said, if you read the book and you love it and you want a speed run of like the highlights, would definitely recommend watching the movie for that. But it's not like an amazing outstanding rom-com on its own, and I don't think I would have loved it so much if I hadn't read the book. And also the movie just hits different when you know a certain thing about this book. I'm just telling you, I love it essentially at this point. Amazing sexual tension. We love an enemies to lovers story. There were bits about this that I guessed quite early on, but it didn't detract away from my enjoyment because I enjoyed seeing it unfold. But there was like a little extra added bit that I just didn't get that just blew my mind. This is not articulate, but I'm obsessed with this and I love it. It was so good. And 5 stars if you didn't guess. And then the last 2 books I read in March were both Unhaul Project books. The first one was Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. This one is an adult mystery about this group of women who live in the suburbs of a town in Australia. 2 of them are more middle-aged and at least I would say middle class. And the third one is a single mother who's just moved to the town. This book opens up with the parents' trivia night at a primary school and somebody is dead. Now throughout the entirety of this book you don't know who's died, you don't know what's happened, you don't know what's led up to it. You just kind of assume that the 3 women who form the main perspectives of this book are somewhat involved or related to the death of whoever it is that's dead. So I gave this 3 stars. I enjoyed it, but only in kind of like a very detached way, because the whole like subject matter of these 3 mothers with very young children who are just starting school is so very outside of my own personal interest, because these are the kind of women whose children are their lives and they dedicate the majority of their daily lives to being mothers, which is something that I just generally cannot relate to, and at this point in my life is not an interest of mine as somebody who is not ready to have kids yet and doesn't have children. That being said, I did find it compelling. I thought that the character work in here was really well done as well. It was a little bit predictable. I did guess the bulk of like one of the things relating to the big reveals, but there were a couple of things that did take me by surprise. And I did also enjoy the way that this book was told, where we start 6 months before the trivia night and kind of like slowly lead up to the night itself, so that you can see how all of these characters have got into the positions they need to be kind of for everything to go down. And there was also like a lot of it had like small town energy, you know, where everybody is all up in everyone's business and everyone's kind of connected in some kind of way that like thickens the plot a little bit. So it was definitely a compelling and interesting read. I did do the Unhaul Project when I was recovering from COVID, so mentally like I just wasn't in the headspace to be really invested in what I was reading. So I'm actually quite glad that I did the Unhaul Project, because as somebody who reads every day I need to constantly have a book on the go. But it was better for me that I was reading things that are like outside of my comfort zone and not things that I was really excited to read, because I feel like my enjoyment of books that I usually would love would have been lessened a lot if I'd have read them in this time. So it was compelling, it was an easy read. I will think about reading from Liane Moriarty before I do know I have at least 1 more book, which I think is Apples Never Fall, but like just subject matter was never going to be a favorite for me. And then the final book I read in March was I Hope You Get This Message by Farah Nazrishi. This one is pretty much a YA contemporary with a sci-fi twist, where humans have discovered that aliens exist because aliens have sent a message to Earth saying that they are very possibly going to hit the kill switch on humanity. This was more sci-fi than I expected it to be, because I expected it to very much focus on how humans were going to react to this news, but we did have like snippets of aliens kind of like deliberating on whether humanity was worth saving, and also a little bit of mixed media in here, because we do have the transcript of those alien conversations, but we also have messages that people are trying to send to their loved ones when they know that the world is possibly going to end in a week. So this mainly follows the perspectives of 3 teenagers who are trying to accomplish something before the world ends. We have a girl whose mother isn't very well and she's never met her father, so she's trying to find him within this week. We have a boy who's trying to find his sister, and we have a boy who's from a very low income family who is trying to make as much money as he possibly can in this time, because he doesn't actually believe that the world is going to end, so he's profiting from the distress of others. Now, as I mentioned with Big Little Lies, I was recovering from COVID at the time that I was reading these books. I have given this one 2 stars, but I haven't rated it on Goodreads, because I think if I was in the headspace to read absolutely anything else, I would have DNF'd this one. However, at the time I just needed something that was really easy to read, and this definitely provided that. I can't really say whether this is bad or good, because my main kind of thoughts and feelings is that that this book is just so far outside anything that I'm remotely interested in at this time in my life that I just read it without retaining any information or really caring about anything that was going on. I think if I'd have read this 4 or 5 years ago when I was still reading at least a little bit of YA contemporary and enjoying it, I would have enjoyed this one a little bit more. But at this stage, YA contemporary is just something that I pretty much do not read from at all. I just didn't care, essentially. Sorry for any angle change there, my battery died. But there were people who commented on the vlog where I read this book and said that they'd read it and they just thought that it was kind of mediocre and didn't have any overwhelming thoughts or feelings on it either way. So maybe that's something to bear in mind if this does sound like a book that you're interested in. But ultimately, this one is just not a book that is for me anymore, but it definitely served its purpose of being like a light, easy read at a time when I did not have the mental capacity to pick up anything else. So there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read in March. A very successful reading month overall. I do have a very large TBR in April, so I'm hoping that I can carry forward some of this energy. I am away quite a bit in April as well, so it's not looking good for me, but I'm in a really big reading mood right now. With the sun coming out a little bit more in the UK and with the clocks going, is it forward? They went. I'm feeling a little bit rejuvenated and a little bit more motivated, and honestly I just want to sit down and read a whole ton of books, but whether I have time to do so is a whole other matter. But as usual, down in the comments, please let me know if you've read any of these books and what you guys thought of them. Aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website, the Instagram and Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.